I'm very happy that I can open this series of lecture of HZT Theater Academy today, which is a series of lecture in our winter semester, and it will go on from today till the end of semester in February. And HZT Theater Academy is a network of theaters and education universities in Giessen. And it's a very particular network which brings students and theater houses and theater initiatives together to work and support the work of the students. And we are organizing every year a series of lectures, so-called Ringvorlesung, and this year it's happening under the title Untitled Performance, Protection and Insecurity. So I would really like to say that this series of lecture is a result of a very strong collaboration between three partners, Sandra Noeth from HZT University of Arts in Berlin, and Francesca Raimondi from Art Academy in Dortmund, and myself, Bojana Kunst, who is working in Giessen at the Institute for Applied Theater Science. And I think that we could not reach this program without our sharing and talks and discussions and really a wonderful collaboration among us. And I would really like to thank you, both of you, to do this together for the start. Just let you know that we will record the session and that we will also then publish the lectures till the end of March online as video recordings, but also audio recordings on different platforms, and that these lectures are also accompanying seminars we are having with our students at our programs, and sometimes we will also bring some questions or discussions from the seminars into the lecture discussion afterwards. You are also welcome to ask questions afterwards and comments in the chat. But for now, we will enable the chat to give the space to our first guest, and we will disable the chat and enable it after the lecture will be finished. But we will guide you through the protocol, so don't worry. And now it's my very big pleasure to introduce Bayo Akomolafe as our first guest to the lecture series. And I have to say, Bayo, I have to tell you how I came also in contact with your thinking, writing. It was actually through listening. I had this practice of listening the podcast before going to sleep. And one of my beloved podcasts was also Emergence Magazine. And that was where I first found. And then I was actually following a lot of it through the practice of listening. Actually, I got to know your thought, and I just wanted to share it to you because it's a very different way also how actually I entered into writing of your texts and so on. And somehow it is very much, I see it very much in connection also with the way how you write and think. And I was really impressed by the strong poetic flow of your thoughts and thinking, and especially also about so many connections and associations and so many entanglements with art practice. And this is also why we were thinking it would be so nice to be with us and actually go that we can go with your thinking and see where are these associations and connections, because there are really so many of questions which are we hearing and discussing in our environments resonating in your texts. And that's actually really one of the very important, I think, perspectives which also brought me to the listening of more text of yours and more talks. But otherwise, I will just introduce you very briefly. Bayo Akomolafe is an activist, philosopher, thinker, also poet, coming from Nigeria, now living in India, I think.
Yes.
At the moment, very much traveling around the world also and lecturing. At the moment, I think you are in Lisbon, and he really established himself in the last years as a speaker, poet, and activist, and a kind of working for a radical paradigm shift in a consciousness and current ways of living. And I would not go more into the details because I think it's the best that we hear you speaking and that we have this opportunity of talking and sharing with you. And so thank you very much for accepting this invitation. And I would really like to give time to you and put us in the listening mode.
My sister, I just realized you're wearing the same, almost the same color, right? Don't you think? I greet you and I thank you for your kind welcome. And I greet everyone here. If you're here and you can hear me, could you just wave your hands in the air? Mostly like you just don't care. Most of you didn't get the reference, right? Hip hop. Okay. My name is Bayo and I'm really glad to be here speaking with you all. And I'm in Lisbon right now. Far away from home. I live in India with my dear family. I'm missing my daughter and my son right now, and my wife. And Lisbon is beautiful. It's my first time in Lisbon, in Portugal. I've been to many other places in Europe, but my first time here. It is beautiful. But as I started to think about being far away, I started to question the notion of what it means to be far away, right? It seems like in these times, what it means to be far away, what it means to be close by, what it means to be near, what it means to be small, what it means to be big. All of these questions are very fluffy these days, wouldn't you agree? Especially in the pandemic. It seems everything is upside down. We no longer know how to situate ourselves in a world that is topsy-turvy. Yeah. How many of you have sensed that time is misbehaving? Right? That if someone asks you a question like, oh, I think I saw you last year, and you're like, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? It seems like the algorithms of time have become unwieldy. Like time is misbehaving and other things are misbehaving. Do you second guess saying hello to someone by shaking their hands? Do you have that moment where you're like, should I shake? Should I hug? What does touch mean? What does it mean to be in touch in an Anthropocene pandemic? Well, to further along these questions and to get us along, I have some slides that I took some time to present to impress you guys. So I would like to see your faces impressed, okay? Like, this is good, kind of, okay? So I'm gonna show you those slides now. I've been given a lot of keynotes this week, and these babies help me situate and discipline my thoughts, okay? So they're the extension of my mind. So thank you, Bill Gates. I'm just gonna ask my brother to allow me, okay, I can share my screen right now. All right, let us begin. So my lecture I called Becoming Black, the colonial grammar of settlement and the promise of fugitive flight. And I really am grateful to my sister Bojana for inviting me to do this. Most of the things that I say are situated within the culture that I come from, and yet not captured or contained within that culture. Sometimes I like to tell folks that I speak from the Atlantic. I don't speak as an African, I speak as a subject of the Middle Passage, as the subject of the rippling waters of the middle, right? That's why I plant my feet on trickster grounds, okay? I situate myself in a crossroads. Do you guys have a conception of a crossroads in your cultures? That is a place where things are so dense and so thick that we no longer have final claims to our identities, right? A crossroad is where our bodies are crossed out by other bodies, where our bodies are shimmering, glowing with other intersections. A crossroads is the relationality of the universe, the idea that nothing is independent, nothing is still. The Yoruba people, I'm a Yoruba person. I come from the Yoruba culture in West Africa, specifically Nigeria. We have a name for this crossroads idea. It's called Orita. Orita means the place where the three roads meet, right? And if you guys know anything about jazz, the blues, you might have heard of a guy called Robert Johnson. Anybody here know Robert Johnson? He's the father of the blues, I think. And it is said, one legend has it that this African American took his guitar to the crossroads and gave it to the man at the crossroads, the devil. And the devil took his guitar, tuned it for him, and gave it back to him. And that's how Robert Johnson charmed the entire world with his music. Well, that man at the crossroads actually comes from my culture. He's called Eshu, okay? And he's a trickster. Does anyone have a conception of tricksters in your culture? I know Loki. I know the fox. I know Brer Rabbit. I know the coyote. Francesca, do you have a conception of a trickster in your culture? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Where are you from, by the way?
I'm from Italy.
Berlin? Oh, you're from Italy. Okay. Do you have a trickster?
Well, of course.
Even modern tricksters.
Yeah, modern tricksters. Good question. Yeah, we have all these, of course, the Christian trickster, you can say, you know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Christian tricksters, it's fine. I don't want to put you in the spotlight. That's fine. I'm just going to call one more person. Cecile, do you have Cecile? Did I pronounce that right? Cecile? Cecily? Cecily.
Yes, Cecile.
Okay. I'm playing with names here. Where are you from, my sister?
I'm from Germany, but my mom is from Prague.
Okay. So do you know any trickster that you're intimate with? Any trickster archetype from your part of the world?
Would be also a fox, maybe.
The fox, yes. Yeah.
It's a very, fox or. Let me think one more second.
No problem. Fox is good. Fox is fine.
Very fitting, yeah.
I'm always in the vocation of finding out all the tricksters because I love tricksters. Tricksters disappoint boundaries, right? Tricksters disturb borders. They're archetypal tropes that invite us to think beyond identity. And I can tell you many stories about Eshu and how he slinks his way through categories of thought. When you're in trouble, you often need a trickster to help you out because the solution might get you into deeper trouble. So a trickster is a disappointment of form, like an invitation to lose our way, to transform, right? To transmutate. We have Anansi the spider in Ghana. We have Ijapa in Yoruba culture. We also have Eshu. Now, Eshu is called a man of the crossroads, the one that holds agency. And his role is so profound in how, in the stories of the transatlantic slave trade, I cannot help but tell it every time that I speak with people that Eshu traveled with the slaves across the Atlantic. He traveled in different forms. He disguised himself in different forms. He became the phallic monument in Washington. He became hip hop in the Bronx in New York. He became Eshu in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in Brazil. and he hid behind Christian gods. It became Saint Peter and Jesus and all of that, hiding underneath the master's gaze, right? So it is from this place of the trickster that I speak, this idea of crossroads that I speak from, and would like to invite you into this place of play and experimentation with me. I was saying a while ago that that's outside. I cannot turn my laptop, but if you're to look outside my window, that's the Lisbon that I see, right? It's a beautiful place. But a while ago, I was asking the question, what does it mean to be away from home? I just said that I'm far away from home, but I'm not that far away from where you guys, most of you are in Berlin. But I still ask the question, what does it mean to be far away? What does it mean to be located? What does it mean to be small? What does it mean to be linked? Especially in these times where everything seems to be upside down. Most importantly, what does it mean to be human, right? If you guys are hearing ambulances outside my window, I know no one I know is in trouble, but I hope whoever is in trouble finds healing. Where it seems like the categories with which we think about the world are now stretchy and now loamy. They're now tactile, right? What it means to be here and to be speaking with hundreds of people in Berlin, in Prague, in, it somehow suggests that distance is no barrier any longer, right? But even more so, the Anthropocene, which is the term that geologists use to describe the trouble we're in these times. The Anthropocene is a useful way for talking about the limitations of progress, right? How boundaries are merging with other boundaries, how the categories with which we think about our bodies are changing. That's the Anthropocene, a trope of trouble. Just another example is the pandemic, right? What is scale in the pandemic? People talk about the virus as if the virus was a tiny reductionistic thing, right? But could we situate the virus as a small thing when that tiny thing has upended entire economies? What does scale mean? What does it mean to be small then? If something as tiny as a virus is disturbing the entire world. And what does it mean to be healthy? If my health is implicated in Francesca's health. If for Francesca to be well, I have to be well also. If we're all connected in these ways, what does it mean to be well? Where does my body stop? Where does yours begin? I just want to convey a sense of spillage, that the usual architecture of sense-making that we're used to is hollowing out, and things are spilling into each other. This spillage is interesting. It is risky, it is dangerous, but it is deeply interesting to me because we're no longer creatures of fixed individuality, static borders, and claims, exclusive claims to being human. All of a sudden, viruses are part of what it means to be human. And the outside is already inside. We are exposed and everything is falling apart. So in this sense, I say here, the Anthropocene is ironically this trope, this age of unsettlement. It's ironic because the Anthropocene is also the mark of human attempts to stamp their authority on the planet. It's our way of saying we are here and we are here in a final and permanent way. But in doing that, the world revolted. The modern human world was like, no, you don't get to say that. And suddenly, we're in an age of viruses and climate change and rising ocean levels and atmospheric volatility and the insurgency of animals. All of a sudden, what it means to be settled is to invoke unsettlement, right? Because the Anthropos project seems to have exacerbated the conditions of unsettlement. right? So it means in order to find a home, we are becoming lost. And so just fix your mind on this idea of the Anthropocene, this ironic search for home that is proliferating homelessness. And I think of no better example to explain this unsettlement than the city of Melilla. Some of you raised your hand. Has anyone been to, I can't see everyone on my screen, obviously, but has anyone, especially those candidates on my screen right now, have you ever been to Melilla or heard of Melilla? Anybody here? Probably not. Melilla is a city owned by Spain, that is a subject of the EU and the European Union. It's about 87,000 people living there. They, like any other European city, they live and buy and sell with the euros. You know, it's European. What's shocking about the city of Melilla is that it is situated in Africa. Geographically, in the northwestern part of Morocco. Think about the irony of that there is a place in Morocco where you go and where you enter into and you are officially in Europe. So this is an exclave in Europe where Africans born in Africa have to climb walls. Look at this wall here. Look at how Trumpian it looks. This wall would give Trump an orgasm. It is just a situation where Africans are trying to enter other parts of Africa, but they're denied because that's European. There's a part of Africa that is European. That's my point here. And that's the city of Melilla. It's not the only one. It's one of two other, I think 4 other exclaves of the European Union. Morocco is actively trying to regain its territory. But that's not my point about introducing the city of Melilla. My point is that every single day, these bodies, Black bodies, try to access this city. They're denied. They try different migratory technologies to get into the city. They're pulled down, they're killed, they're maimed, they're injured. Some of them lose entire limbs. And yet they don't have access. The people living in Melilla are afraid of these people trying to get in because they think they are going to be unsafe if these Black bodies get into Africa. The irony of it is astounding. But Melilla raises a question for me, or a series of questions. What does it mean to be at home when home no longer recognizes you? What does it mean to be ejected from your own mother's womb? To be orphaned by your mother's womb? To be denied recognition on the lands that gave birth to you? That is the heart of the Anthropocene, homelessness. Homelessness while you're still at home. In other words, to become Black. To become Black. So I want to tell 2 stories while we still have time. 2 stories of unsettlement. And what I want to do with these 2 stories is to juxtapose them. The first story is called Becoming Black. And the second story is called Becoming Black. It's Blackness with 2 cadences, right? And I'll explain what I mean. I want to tell these 2 stories and tell the story of how art, how the prophetic imagination, how art curates this process of transformation within colonization, right? How this aesthetics of emancipation might help us during these times of trouble. Okay, these are the stories I want to tell. But first, this is not prior to the story, the first story, but part of the story. let's get back to the Anthropocene, because the Anthropocene is a story of becoming Black. It is a story of identity. It is a story of the unsettling of the subject. It is a story of bodies becoming undone, right? It is the cost of becoming an identity subject within the city. Some of you may know that this story that happened in 1904, between 1904 and 1908, Germany, German forces maimed, killed, and destroyed tens of thousands of people living in Namibia, from the tribes of Herero and Nama, now present-day Namibia. The Angela Merkel government has been in talks with the Namibian people, the people of this tribe, for years now, negotiating what it means to be forgiven. How do we say sorry for this thing that happened in 1904? How do we make amends, right? And part of these discussions, you might notice is familiar, is a conversation about restitution. You have to pay us for this, or you have to give us financial aid of some kind. The German government has resisted. They said, no, we're not going to do that. But we're going to give you, €1 billion or 10 billion euros to support your infrastructural development, to support your people, your education. I want to ask a question. How much is a life? How much is the cost, or how pricey, or what's the cost of trauma, of intergenerational trauma? If you were to put it in euro amounts or in dollar amounts, what's the cost of loss when the people lose their home and lose their people and lose the relationships they have with ancestry and mountains and stones and the sacred? How do you weight that in money terms, in monetary terms? That's the problem with the Anthropocene. It can do lots of things. It can tell us about how bodies become unsettled. It can tell us how bodies became Black, how they were stolen from home and transported to the city to build the project of the anthropos, of the human, of white modernity. It can tell us all about that, but it does not know how to deal with loss. It doesn't know what to recommend beyond that. So like today, modernity is mounting an irredentism is a political movement that is about restoring stolen land, stolen art to the people who traditionally lay claim to that, right? Modernity is trying to restore, the territories that have been lost to the modern human, restore it to itself. And we're trying to win in many ways. We're trying to save the day. How are we trying to save the day? Climate justice. The Anthropocene is about climate justice. Modernity wants to restore the sanctity of the public order. And how are we doing this? You might recognize some of this. Green technologies. Let's go green, everyone. Let's divide our trash into neatly, conveniently divided and parsed trash bins. Let's do away with plastic. Let's not use plastic straws. This is climate justice, right? And then racial justice. Modernity wants a public order where Black bodies and non-white bodies of different kinds can live together without outside of the insecurity of trauma, outside of the insecurity of being unprotected, eaten but never digested. My question is this enough? Does this go far enough? So in short, the Anthropocene pathologizes unsettlement. And in doing so, it demonstrates its lack of imagination. What I'm trying to say here by all of this is that we have been wounded. Our bodies are unsettled. Our bodies are broken open, and there are cracks everywhere. What the Anthropocene tries to do with its justice, with its various justice programs, justice, even with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, what it wants to do is to restore things, is to cover things over, is to put a Band-Aid, on the wounds, to close up the pathological spaces. That's the Justice Project. But we're saying, and with my question about how much is trauma worth, I'm asking, does that feel adequate to the feelings of loss that have been suffered by people? Does it feel like bodies unsettled will be justified by the coverage of justice? So in using the idea of Anthropocene, I wanted it to do more. I've always been speaking about the Anthropocene, and I've been stretching it and pulling it and wanting it to do more than it does. So I'm constantly speaking about loss and ancestry and archetypal longings and the more than human. And as I started to use the Anthropocene as a term to explain all of that, I noticed it could only go as far or only go so far. It couldn't do so much, right? It could tell me about becoming Black, becoming a subject of the city, even though a reduced and minoritarian subject of the global order. But it didn't tell me something else. It didn't tell me about the grace of unsettlement. And my people, this is what I want to talk about today, the grace and the gift of unsettlement. That the places that modernity has named as a sickness, as pathology, is also a place of grace and strange prosperity and strange abundance. That to be unsettled is not to be done with. To be unsettled is to invite other ways of being in the world. Just like to be sick sometimes can give you a vision of life that you could not have by being whole and healthy. The invitation here is to lean into the gifts and the treasures of being broken open, which the Anthropocene does not know how to do, which our present order of nation states does not know how to do. So Michaelis, is that your name, brother? Michaelis, are you broken? I'm going to offer you some money to feed your brokenness. No, you don't need to unmute yourself. I just play with names that way. Anahita, what have you suffered? What have you suffered? Oh, here's some dollar amount. Oh, we're suffering from climate change. Let's give the ocean a dollar amount. So how much does the ocean cost? $1 trillion. That's all the Anthropocene knows how to do, to restore everything to monetary terms or to anthropocentric terms, to countable reductionistic value. And we are saying that that may be risky because it could restore the troubles that we're trying to leave behind. Because the Anthropocene does not trace the legacy of displacement. It does not know how to account for the fact that even though you could give a dollar amount in reparation value to people in Africa, for instance, it could never speak to the bodies that were dumped in the Atlantic. It could never tell a story about the bones that are buried within the modernity order or within the modern order. It could never talk about the haunting of the public in modernity. So this is the other story that I want to talk about. The first story is becoming Black. We have a joke in Lagos on the streets that until the white people came, we did not know we were Black, right? So becoming Black was a way, is a story or narrative of displacement, of extraction, of capture, of coloniality, of transatlantic adventures. But there's a different becoming Black that I want to speak about. So the first becoming Black is big B Blackness. Blackness as an identity. Blackness as how I see myself. Blackness as a category in a form, in an office, in the city, or in an institution that tells me to tick what I am. So what are you? I am Black, right? So Blackness as an identity is a creature or symptom of the Anthropocene, is a symptom of white modernity, is a symptom of the city. But there's a different other Blackness, stranger than identity. In fact, it is not an identity at all. It is a strain away from identity. It is an unfurling of identity. I call this small b Blackness. those of you who are familiar with Black studies might understand what I mean here. And you don't need to be a professor in Black studies to know what I mean. Black studies is not about Black people or having Black skin. Black studies is about the arrangement that creates identity boxes and how we are vaster than those arrangements, bigger territorially than identity. That is, in a way, Ana Clara Montenegro is vaster than identity. What you are is spillage. You're continually fugitive, escaping those little boxes that modernity tries to incarcerate you within, right? So that's small b Blackness. Here I write that becoming Black is a desirous, unlanguageable. It cannot be put into words. Immediately you put it into words, it becomes an identity. Immediately you put it within the grammar of pronouns and nouns and verbs, then it becomes identity. But it escapes the materiality of language. So becoming Black is the desirous atrophication or flowering of bodies. It's how our edges are always doing things, trafficking in conspiracies beyond just telling us who we are or who we are not. It means, in a sense, that we're monstrous, right? And that our bodies are unwieldy and wayward. Let me put it in this way, that we are not only made up of what we are made up of what we are not. Right? So identity is not just a mark of presence in the world, it is a mark of absence. So who are you is a beguiling question, because it hides and obscures all the things that make me me, and all the things that make me me are still becoming. In fact, sometimes I try to say we shouldn't use human being, we should use human becoming, because we're not done, we're still unfurling, we're still becoming, right? We're wayward, promiscuous becomings. We're not as situated or as languageable as habits of perception think we are. This is what I call, and this is a digression, transraciality. Transraciality is my theory or thesis about race and how race is like maybe I should call it a murmuration of starlings. Have you ever come out of your window, your balcony, and seeing birds swarming together, the starlings, making shapes in the sky, right? If I were to ask you, what's the shape of a murmuration? It's called a murmuration. What's the shape of a murmuration? It has no shape, right? Or it's shaping. The shape is shaping. There's no definite shape to it. At any one time, it's constantly moving and spilling away from what you said it was. Do you lie down on the grass and look up and say, what's the shape of that cloud? Right. It seems cloud upset our claims to management or definition. In the same way, transraciality is the view of race from the perspective of movement. It is the noticing that bodies are not static, they're ecstatic, they're constantly moving in a way that art can only capture, right? It's not that there are dancers that dance, it's that dance enlists bodies in its materiality, right? Dancing is embodied and it creates the dancer in the moment. So it's not that I'm a dancer, now I shall dance. Sorry, that's not exactly a good way to memorialize or lionize dancing. But you get what I mean. That dancing is embodied and our bodies are always enlisted in this larger territoriality of dancing, of movement. If I were to see you as movement instead of a definite pre-relational, pre-dancing object, then what does race become? It becomes the texture of bodies in their difference-making materialities, right? Nothing is still, nothing is final. My Blackness is a creature, the big B Blackness is a creature of the city, and its desire to stamp its permanence. But even operating within the city is this small b blackness that is peeling away at my identity, that is saying, you're not as coherent as you think you are. You're not all that. You're not all there. This small b blackness is the technology of tricksters, right? So here I write about this peeling away as racial demolecularization, right? It's how we're constantly fading away. There's a chiasmus of loss. It's the shape of yearning, so that even white bodies are not white. How dare you say that? How dare you say that? White bodies are white. They need to pay for all their sins and their white privilege. Yeah, that's what the city instigates us to say. That's the epistemology, the cosmology, the vision of the city and its justice paradigms. I speak from a cosmology that exceeds justice, that is animist, that is flowing like art and dancing, that is never still, right? It is what James Baldwin spoke about when he said, tell them they are not white. I'm paraphrasing here. Because if they stick to the idea that they are white and we are black in a final sense, then we have no hope, right? So I want you to come in touch with the idea that our identities are monsters. They are fugitive. Do you understand the notion of fugitivity? Escaping from the slave plantation, escaping from the grammar of labor. Something spills away, something runs away. But to think this way is to require an animism cosmovision, is to go, like I said, beyond justice and beyond the technologies of the public. We're speaking about the grace of unsettlement and the hidden treasures in the places that modernity wants to pathologize. And with that, I want to tell you a story. A story that I call Abayomi. It's a different iteration of the stories that I've been telling around Abayomi. This is one depiction of Eshu, an artistic depiction of Eshu, always dancing, always moving, always playing with the colors red and black, contrasts. But this story is not canonical. It is not traditional to the Yoruba people. It is a reiteration of the stories that have been told about Eshu. And this story traverses the Atlantic. I borrow in telling this story from Brazilian, Afro-Brazilian spiritualities, Yoruba spiritualities, Atlantic spiritualities, to tell the story of how at the heart of coloniality is something throbbingly alive, something that will not be captured, something that art can only speak to, art can only curate. I was in Brazil a couple of years ago, and I ran into some people in favelas making rag dolls, a rag doll, just from their shirts, they were making rag dolls, okay? And I was on a tour, speaking tour, and a teacher grabbed my hand and said, "This is a doll, a rag doll." And I was like, nice. I'm not really excited about dolls. So I wanted to move on and get to the next leg of my visit. But this teacher was firm, and I'm so grateful for her firmness. She held my hand and said, I don't know why she did so, but she said, "This doll's name is Abayomi." Now this startled me because Abayomi is the name of my father and the name of my son. So they had named this rag doll after my father and after my son. And I was curious. Of course, I know that Yoruba people live in Brazil. Yoruba people were enslaved and they were transported to Brazil. So I knew all of that. I was fascinated with the fact that they had named this doll after Abayomi, but I couldn't understand why. So I asked them, and they told me a story. They told me the story of a woman who had been enslaved, and she was enslaved with her child and taken aboard one of those slave ships. in trying to console her child and stop the child from crying and potentially losing the life of the child, she prayed to Ishu. She prayed to Ishu for help. She called on Ishu, said, please help me, save us or something. Why did you allow this to happen to us? Now, in the legacy stories that this woman told me, the woman was inspired to tear her dress and to weave the fabric of her dress into a doll. And that doll, she called it Abayomi. And for a short time, at least, the baby was consoled. The baby was put to sleep, so to speak. Now, the meaning of Abayomi is interesting. Abayomi means they thought they had buried me, but they did not realize that I'm a seed. Right? Abayomi means the enemy would have won, the enemy would have been victorious, but God prevailed. Right? So Abayomi is the idea that even in suffering, even underneath the boots of colonial oppression, there is life of a queer kind. There is a strange sort of vitality that will not be snuffed out by the bullets of the colonial oppressor. Nothing can snuff that out. There's something that is alive even in death. That's the notion of Abayomi. But the story I'm telling you is a different version of that. And I wrote this out for a museum in Vermont. Not a museum, just a place of contemporary arts, something like a museum where works of art are displayed. But there's a lot of dancing and movement. The story I tell is that when this woman prayed to Ishu, Ishu came aboard as a stranger, and he took the child from the woman and danced with the child for the duration of the entire slave trip, just dancing and waltzing, that there was an orchestra aboard the slave ship. And it is the most beautiful vision. It is the most Black vision of emancipation that I can have, at least at this point. That even in the heart of this jail, this sailing jail, that there was a God dancing with a slave that escaped the master's vision, that escapes the master's ears. This idea of dancing, in the midst of suffering, is the surprising grace of displacement, of unsettlement. It disturbs the idea that I can be caught in a final way. It is the irrepressible freedom of fugitivity. You know that knee of the police officer that pressed hard on George Floyd's neck, right? Remember the story? And George Floyd crying out, saying, "Mama," right? He was calling out for his mother. There are many similar stories like that. The idea that even when you press my neck, when you whip me open, I shall be reconnected with ancestors. I will go to places that are beyond your jail cell. It is a story of Wakanda. If you guys have watched Black Panther, and at the end of that story, what's his name? The other guy, the villain, says, "I will rather join my people," right, who were thrown aboard the slave ships. "I would rather join them and stay alive." I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But it's the idea that even in Auschwitz, in those containment camps, there were smiles that resisted the capture of their soldiers, of the Nazi. It always takes a lot telling these stories, right? So becoming Black is the idea, is the speculative fabulation that bodies unsettled are not bodies discarded. Bodies unsettled are not bodies denied. Bodies unsettled are not bodies eradicated. Bodies unsettled are invitations to meet ourselves in new ways, that there is a hidden trickster, indigenous, emancipatory, decolonial, spiritual art in being oppressed that might help us world the world in different ways. In order to counteract this story of the Anthropocene, that the only way we can meet trouble, climate change, pandemics, is to try to solve them, I coined the term Afroscene. The Afroscene is the territory of falling apart. It is the idea that the insecurity of loss hides joy. And that art only happens in cracks. If you can write that somewhere, write it down. Art is not possible where there's settlement. Art needs unsettlement to work. Art is the technology of unsettlement. Art is the texture of cracks. Wherever there are openings in the world, that's where art thrives. What you see as art in cities today is mostly furniture, right? I'm talking about something that is alive and moving and instigatory. That's a crack in the familiar. That is art. And it is art that is entrusted with the task of disturbing identity. When a dance is happening, when performative arts are afoot, when a dancer moves to the left and the right, the dancer, like I've said, is not just dancing. The dancer is speaking beyond words about the ecstasy or the ecstatic movements of the body, how the body cannot be contained. And how we are always living in a teenage indetermiverse. Forgive my language, okay? Instead of universe, I call it indetermiverse, because the universe kind of feels like a containment universe, one thing. Indetermiverse is about the indeterminacy of becomings. That is, things are still figuring themselves out. There's no universe, there's no multiverse, there's only indetermiverse. So to close things out, I want to ask the question, how does art help us stay with the trouble of unsettlement? How is art an invitation to be unsettled, to be disturbed? And how is being disturbed part of potentially emancipatory, potentially decolonial politics? Again, let me situate to summarize things just so it's neat and tidy for the meantime. Our solutions today can only go so far. Reparations, restitution, justice, it's all nice. We need that as well. I'm not discarding or dismissing that. But it needs to be supplemented by something else. Because all the green technologies in the world, all the Paris conferences in the world, all the, I don't know, name it, fill the gaps, will not address the ontological weight of loss and trauma that is swimming around us and in which we have our being. Something else is desired beyond solutions. Something else wants to happen beyond proliferating new identities within the city that is the very bedrock of violence. Something else wants to happen. The Anthropocene is unlikely to help us meet those things because the Anthropocene is the doubling down on human agency. But what the Anthropocene does not know how to touch is the idea that the human is itself a political project. It's a closed cultural project that has led to the denial, excavation, displacement, and annihilation of peoples. We need something more than liberal humanist traditional subjectivity to address the ills of today. We need to become animal. We need to become Black. That doesn't mean that Anahita takes on Black skin, right? That's not the point. That doesn't mean that Marie, becomes literal Black like me. By the way, I'm the blackest of Black, so you've probably, I'm Black. There's no category for my blackness, my wife continually tells me. But it's not about becoming Black identity. It's about noticing, and I think this is at the heart of everything I'm saying today, it's about noticing that we ourselves are not as well put together as we think, that our edges, our identities are fugitive. Do you know what whiteness is? Whiteness is the denial of fugitivity. Whiteness is turning away from the idea that I'm sailing and becoming animal, along with ecology, along with ancestrality, along with archetypes in the air. Whiteness is the search for purity, the idea of transcendence, the instigation of escape. It wants to transcend the materiality of things and to arrive like, the mother of Baldur, Freya. It wants to tame everything so that it can mount an architecture of presence. Right? That's what whiteness wants to do. But we cannot allow whiteness to do that because we're all caught up in whiteness together. All of us, white bodies, not yet white bodies, Black bodies, brown bodies, green bodies, we're all caught up in the trope of whiteness. We're all caught up here together, but it's not working for us anymore. The project is defunct. And so what do? Repair, seek justice, become good white allies? No, that's not quite enough. We need to fall apart. We need to follow the threads of our becoming. And that is always happening. It's not a new project. It's about listening, like Bojana, my sister, said. It's about listening differently to the world around us. It's about co-creating different artistic, political imaginaries where we are committed not to the freedom that the state grants us, but to the queerness, the exquisite queerness of nature, what we rudely call nature. And this is the invitation of the Trinidadian novelist called Earl Lovelace. He spoke about bacchanal aesthetics from the god Bacchus, the god of wine and dancing and merrymaking. Right? Bacchanal aesthetics is the artistic, political inquiry that focuses on the slaves and their experiments with presence and absence when they were stolen. The question that I asked for you is, what do you do, again, like I asked before, what do you do when home is no longer hospitable? When home is no longer like home? Well, these are the things you do. Some of the things that were done and we can learn from. Capoeira. How many of you have heard of capoeira? Capoeira? Great. Capoeira didn't come on the backs of a Paris conference. It wasn't a manifesto designed by a political committee. It happened in the midst of suffering. Like all art, it emerged when, tales of the slave masters, inviting and compelling their property to dance for their entertainment. Right? And not just to dance for their entertainment, because these Black bodies were property. They needed to sell them to the highest bidder, right? And so they needed to keep them fit and sturdy. So they commanded them most of the time on these transatlantic journeys to dance, like dance for us. Capoeira was martial arts hiding as dance. It was subterfuge, it was fugitivity. Right there in the dancing, they were hiding languages, ways of communicating, ways of listening to ancestry, ways of communicating with memory and hope. Right? They were listening to all of that in those movements. I don't know if you've watched the spirituality of capoeira today. It is at once the most threatening thing and the most beautiful thing to watch. The movements, the hesitation, the leaning back and forth. It's beautiful. What of candomblé? Candomblé was like the memory of losing one's sense of vision. I can imagine those slaves as they started to retreat from the shoreline, as home started to retreat become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. That vision was no longer helpful for them in tracing their way home. Vision was no longer a helpful sense to cultivate. So what did they do? They cultivated other senses. That's why in some of candomblé rituals today, they literally blind their eyes. They blindfold themselves and they commit themselves to a trance, right? They dance into home. They make home in homeless circumstances, right? They hide their gods beneath the gods of their slavers, of their masters. I could talk about fugitive sciences and the economic strategies of slaves in Gayat cultures. I could speak about post-nationalist imaginaries, the idea that beneath the surface, there were worlds that were happening. And that is my spiel today. That is my story. That art, the performative arts, can teach us something vital. Not all performative art is decolonial, I think, but decoloniality is definitely performative art. It's about the aesthetics of leaning into the insensible. That is, it is about cultivating new senses. And senses, I do not mean ears, eyes, smell, all of that. Senses are not just things we have. Senses are the worlds around us. We're constantly cultivating new senses. In modernity, we cultivate the sense of being in friendship with others through Facebook. That's just sense, right? We cultivate different senses with different technologies. What we want to do right now is to cultivate other senses that lean us towards the decolonial, that distress the idea that we can be contained or surveilled or captured by modernity. If we are in trouble within the Anthropocene, the solution lies in getting lost, not creating green technologies, as important as they might be. The more than solution lies within getting lost. And this is why my people say the times are urgent, let us slow down. In order to find your way, you must become lost. In order to sense differently, you have to yield to something beyond yourself. And I think I'll stop there with my story of becoming Black. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bayo. Thank you. We will enable the chat now, so just a moment that we come together. Just have to see you. Thank you so much.
Were you stretching all the while for that part?
We will enable the chat so that the people can also write the questions and comments in the chat, that they can come to us and we can collect them. Thank you very much, Bayo. It's very difficult to start. I don't want to start with the usual question and answers, but I was just thinking you start with the trickster, and you really did a lecture as a trickster for us, because you really showed also with the images and with the way how you start the limits of Anthropocene imaginary. You started with this very hard image to watch on Melilla, and I was really thinking through your lecture like this incapacity also of the Anthropocene imaginary to do whatever with this all these imaginaries of suffering, and it's a very interesting. And then you came to the story of Aksu, which actually really tried to push and expand these limits of the imaginary. I would just like maybe to address a little bit that, because it's also very much connected to art practice, like how to explode or implode this imaginary, which is actually saying us or showing us the state of the world or the crisis of the world in which we are. and actually invent or imagine other ways of how to tell stories. I read it very much also like that through the materials you showed to us.
Right. Thank you, my sister. I think I want to give very grounded examples here. I was writing my second book, These Routes Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter. And I remember getting stuck in some place. And I don't know how many of you are writers here or enjoy writing. But it's my experience that when things are cool and settled, when the environment is pristine, writing doesn't thrive. Right? It seems it dries up. The wellspring of inspiration suddenly vanishes. I remember struggling to write, and what I told myself was that I wasn't writing or flowing as I wanted to lyrically because there was so much noise around me. So my wife was constantly saying, okay, no problem. I'll take the kids. We'll just go to a room or go to my mom's place. I'll give you 1 week. I want you to finish chapter 1, 2, and 3. Okay? And I'll be like, no problem. Just this is all I need. Just the silence, and I can get work done. And then my wife, beautiful, she leaves with our children. And I say, okay, now that I have the silence, I'm going to write tomorrow. I'll start tomorrow. You know? And then tomorrow comes, and I'm like, I have the time, I have the space. All I want is here. I'll start next tomorrow. And before I know it, it's 1 hour before my wife gets back. And I'm like, oh shit, I have to write. It's like writing art is a subject of cracks, like I said. It thrives in agonistic circumstances, right? Where there's errancy and where there's disturbance. Anna Wagner called this polyphonic assemblages, right? That is, the disturbance is not at the end of the line. The disturbance is here in the middle. We have to learn to situate ourselves here in the middle, right? The Anthropocene is about endings. It wants to get to the end of things with resolutions. And that's why its political imaginaries are about quick and easy resolutions. How do we solve this? How do we get rid of this? How do we get back to normal, right? With the pandemic, I gave a keynote 3-4 days ago about vaccine hesitancy. And I spoke about how there are no such things as vaccines. There's only vaccine plus, right? Because everything is entangled. And what the technology of vaccination is now entangled with is the promise of continuity. It's the idea that we can get back to the way things were. It's the proliferation of the individual, right? So if Bojana can be vaccinated, then you can have your health restored to you. That's promising, that's fine, but it also risks endangering the idea that our health and our bodies are entangled and connected. So this is the ontological tension that we deal with, even when we rush to solutions. So the idea of art then is generative incapacitation, not skill development, not capacity development, but generative incapacitation. That is, in falling apart, we transform. Right? In the noise, in the errancy, something is made available that is not available when things are settled. Right? When things settle, when the dust settles, that everything becomes easy, convenient. But like my brothers and sisters in India say, to name the color, you blind the eye. To name the color, you blind the eye. So I guess that's one way I will respond to it. Art is the curation of aesthetic or decolonial sensibilities. And I think we cannot do without it that way.
Thank you. There is also, I will just be very short with this because it's a very short question from our students who were also reading the text of yours today. And
which one?
coming down to the earth. And
that is a lot of text.
Yeah, that's a lot of text, and we were talking a lot about sanctuary, but there was a wonderful question, because on one side, art can do a lot of things, and you actually really approach art now in a very, let's say, affirmative way. But there was a question, what happens when we leave the art spaces? And that was so interesting, this question. What happens when we leave theaters? Because they were talking, is the art space also a kind of a sanctuary? And I think the idea of art are you talking about is actually also that there is no border between what happens when we leave after, and that's connected to that. No?
Yes.
This was in our discussions, and the students also posed this question then as a question for you.
I think, it was Fred Moulton that asks the question. Fred Moulton, the writer of Beyond the Commons and the professor of language, I think, that, where does the music stop and where does it begin? Does the music start when who's the guy that wields the stick? Is it the orchestrator or what? I don't know what they're called.
Yeah.
Conductor, there you go, language. When the conductor wields his stick, is that when it begins? And when he puts down the stick, is that when it stops, right? And he was trying to disappoint the idea of easy, convenient, modern assigned boundaries. That music spills beyond when it stops, right? Because we talk about movies, for instance, long after the movie is over. How many of you watched what's that Christopher Nolan movie? Inception. How many of you watched Inception here? Well, you didn't watch Inception. Come on, my sister, you need to watch Inception. You please do. Inception, long after it's over, we're still talking about it. What does the spinning top mean? We're having conversations about it. The movie is still going on beyond its continuity. In the same way, I think art is more than its modern assignment to the art sector or to the studio, right? Art is not just the studio. Art is not just what we do in the studio. Art spills beyond that. It spills beyond paintings. It is the generativity of failure. It is the generativity of borders. It is the generativity of incapacitation. It is how, and it's not even a human thing. I need to stress this. Art is not a human product. Art is how the world worlds itself, right? Even science is a form of art. Science is not the brutal, physical, stoic, neutral, apolitical, ahistorical cousin of art, right? Science is art. It is one way of meeting the world, right? And that is the thing where I think about art, that art is a more than human trope of becoming.
I think while we can open the discussion, because there are some questions in the chat or also from my colleagues, maybe. Would be nice to open it up. Sandra, did you collect some chat?
Yeah, actually, just thank you very much, Bayo, and just connecting to what you were saying and taking on this idea of disintegration, disidentification, your call for disturbance, actually, and also the critical idea about restitution. I was thinking when I think about, because Jürgen in the chat was saying, but how to dance on settlement. And I was thinking, if I think about performing arts, bodies being exposed to each other, when you you were saying it's not only about these kind of senses, but the breath, the smell, the other, and so on, which is a kind of disturbance. And I was wondering if maybe there is a very practical training in recognition that art can offer, which is different from restitution. And also Nathaniel posted a question in the chat. I don't know, Nathaniel, if you would like to read it out yourself. I can't see you.
I can do that.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
But should I do it now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bayo. That was amazing. Yeah, I'll just read what I wrote. So I wrote that like performative art, as you call it, occurs in a Western context. I think primarily in the I have a stutter, city, as you name it. And in the city, like you said, comes with its own set of identitarian politics, dividing, labeling, placing, right, wrong, and out. And which I can associate with in mainstream liberal politics of also CARE, politics of anyone, you can help me out if you want.
Care, basically politics of care.
Yeah, exactly. Where boundaries are extremely important, and the boundaries which were actually given by the politics of the city. Example, capital B Black versus lowercase black.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how you imagine a performative art grounded in becoming lost, which meets the binary responses of the city and its institutional programs, and which are aligned with contemporary and respectable identity politics and care politics. Or another way to say it is, how do you imagine the meeting of transgression, of becoming lost, with the boundaries of CARE, care? Also, just thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Sandra's question was, could you repeat yours, Sandra? The heart of your question.
No, it was
your
not so
contribution.
much.
Yeah.
I think it was not so much a question. It was just trying to think along on what you were saying. So if we really stay with disintegration and so on, and if I'm thinking about what does it do, bodies being exposed to each other, for example, in dancing, performing, and so on, and being connected to sensing, you know, we're also speaking about the significance of the absence, the borders in ourselves, and so on. And I'm at the same time stuck with this idea of restitution, the boundaries of that, about the economies of bodies that you were talking about, and thinking, what if, because I'm thinking, what can art train us? And then I'm thinking maybe it can help us practice recognition in a very literal sense, but also in an ethical sense. So basically I'm interested what kind of body are you imagining at these thresholds and crossroads of individual specific questions? And maybe here it joins Nathaniel's questions about the boundaries of care and the significance of boundaries.
Yeah, beautiful. I think there are many inroads into this conversation about practical politics in response to the tensions around identitarian issues, and also, you know, being readily available for flight. What the French philosopher Deleuze would call flight, you know, that is moving away from convergence, moving away from recognition, moving away from matters of justice, but not dismissing matters of justice. You know, I think the politics of care is not just matters of justice, it's also matters of transformation, matters of becoming, right? So what I'm trying to do these days is to weave that kind of politics together with a community of people around the world. I call it making sanctuary. I am very hesitant to reduce the idea of making sanctuary, which is multimodal, multi-methodological, multi-practical, multi-ancestral. It is not just a single methodology. Like, here is a practice Sandra can do, and at the end of this ABC practice, you'll be enlightened. You know, I'm very, very, very wary of that kind of linearity. And it's very humanocentric. It guarantees you something at the end of something. I prefer to frame this idea of making sanctuary as humility, as modest defamiliarization, as a waiting at the gates, the liminal gates of the unknown, of mystery. It's very animist in its articulation. It's very post-humanist. It asks us, what can we do with hopelessness? Where can we sit on this slave ship? How do we situate ourselves in this trouble? Right?
So
do you want to say something, Sandra? Yeah?
Matter of scale, really.
It even goes, well, I'm not sure what you mean by scale, right? But because
scale, not scale.
Scale, yes, that's what I heard you say, scale.
But maybe because there is a couple of more questions, and I would like to bring other people in. So there is Elena.
I'll listen to Elena after I respond to Nathaniel. I have something to say.
Sorry, of course. Yeah.
But you could see both your questions in the same spirit, Nathaniel, my brother. I hear what you say about how do we deal with the present? We need to still pay our bills as subjects of the city, right? So like I want to say very briefly, there is no dismissing justice. I'm not calling for, let's do away with Black Lives Matter. Let's do away with critical race theory. Let's do away with intersectionality. We need to say these things because we still live in the city. But if we limit ourselves to the politics of recognition, we risk becoming the city. And then we're caught, we're stuck. So we need something of a simultaneity with this, a politics of going invisible, a politics of becoming Black as much as possible, as much as a politics of thriving in our identitarian Blackness. Yeah. Sandra.
Eleanor, would you like to bring your question to the space?
Sure, yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Holy crap, yeah, Bayo, this is epic. I feel
Did you just say holy crap?
That, I think that oxymoron sums up my experience right now.
Nice. Holy crap.
But like when you're talking, I've been really just, I'm thinking a lot about this somatic abolitionism work I've been doing with this racialized trauma therapist, Resma Menachem.
Resma, my brother.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm really curious, like, I guess I just want to know your take on like the somatic approach to all this. And like, it feels so resonant for me listening. And I'm trying to ask this in a way that's not like, tell me what to do, tell me what to add, like it feels like it could so easily fall into like, give me the practice to create the solution, etc.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like there is such a somatic psychology approach to what you're talking about and like the way our bodies and nervous systems work. And I somehow just wanted to hear you speak to that. My question is like, what in somatics is relevant to you, or like, how do you think about ways of articulating the nervous, like, is it even relevant to articulate this like Western approach to nervous systems and fight or flight response and like calming that through vagus nerve practices? Like, I just want to know your take on it, basically.
Have you listened to my public conversation with Resma?
No. Okay, well now I need to do that.
It's available, but we had a good conversation publicly. It's available to everyone. Find it somewhere. It's somewhere in the web, on the internet. Maybe if you type out our names together, you might find it in Vimeo or YouTube. And, there are lots of places of convergence with Resma's work and divergence. And that's what makes it rich, right? We're not in total agreement about everything. And God, thank you for that. And we're not, reflections of each other in that way. My point, maybe I can stress it here, is that the somatic term, right? We're not calling it the somatic term because everyone is returning to the vitality of the body. We're moving away from the mind. We're starting to pay attention to what our bodies are doing. And it's a beautiful term, just like a material term. Beyond the linguistic term. We've had many terms, the post-humanist term, now the somatic term. However, I am noticing a bioreductionism that is suddenly a part of this somatic term. So I could put it this way, that the soma is the point. Yes, the soma, the body is the point, but the point is stranger than we think. Right? The point is actually not a point. I'm playing with poetry and words here. The point is a line, right? So it seems like in returning the body, the gesture of returning for the somatic movement kind of reified a body that was easily accessible, easily intelligible. In my sense of things, somatic is semiotic and semiotic is somatic. We cannot remove the two. It's what Karen Barad would call material semiotic. I think somatic has to be weighed with politics. There is no static body. There's no principally or universally black body or white body, right? None of that, and even in focusing on the nervous system, we obscure the role the environment plays in remaking and shape-shifting our bodies. We obscure the fact that the nervous system is already ecological. It's not some internal coherent system, right? So it is useful. You know, I recommend divine Kegels to everyone. Do a Kegel once or twice. Attend to your vagus nerve. But our bodies are much more disorganized than the complete picture of Western-produced picture that we're used to, right? I can say more about it, but it will take another keynote. But I would invite you to watch the conversation with Resma. I think it has some things there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We are almost at the end. Do we still have time for one short question, or because we would also like to give you this email where you can post your thoughts and questions and comments, and we can then share it also among us and with Bayo and with the students, so that the questions are not staying open.
Bojana, I think there was one more question that also Francesca wanted to bring.
Super, great, great, Francesca.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bayo, for the very beautiful talk and unsettling talk. And and there is also still a question from the audience. Maybe I can link mine a bit, because you were already talking about the body and the question of Julia, she can then pose it herself, is about fugitivity and if it's state of mind or of a living, and I was still wondering about this getting lost you were talking about, and this process of doing it, maybe related to the trickster. So do we, need tricksters for? So how? Because it's not an activity, so the activity would be, but are you also talking about this slowing down, this kind of listening, this stepping back, or maybe non-doing? Is this the process to get, or do we need tricksters? Do we need sort of maybe a different form of care, like people taking care of us in getting lost, like you're maybe doing with us now? And maybe then when Julia can just directly add her question, which is more specific on the background of and then you pick them up together and then.
On my background?
I think you were talking with me, right? That I posed the question. So,
Julia Apps.
No, I think I see in the same direction, actually, Francesca, because Bayo, thank you very much. I am Brazilian, so I was trying this morning to explain for the group of Bojana's seminar what means candomblé. So it's not so easy to explain. But I believe, as with my Brazilian experience, it's a state of mind. I mean, of consciousness, it's a bodily practice for sure for those that do the practice of candomblé. So I was wondering if fugitive, this term or this concept or this thinking is related with this kind of consciousness.
Yes.
To name it, So that's my question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, my sister. Francesca, I think you've articulated your question. Can I go? Can I make an attempt at a response? I think I can answer, both questions in one fell swoop, in this way, and maybe a little back and forth might be invited here, Francesca. So let me ask you a question. What do you do when you have toothache? What ritual do you engage in, Francesca? What's your ritual when you have a toothache?
Toothache.
What's your ritual?
Well, I never have toothache, but when I have other ache,
any other kind of ache.
That's a gift. So I don't know. I don't know this, but
you have
other aches, I try to release. I try to Yeah.
You release. Okay.
Yeah.
No, do you go to the doctor? Do you go to the doctor at all?
Yeah, well, if it's
that
very
bad.
strong, I need a help. Yeah.
Right. Getting lost is about practices, practices of coherence and rituals. We often don't think about it this way, but modernity is a site of rituals. We do things regularly to maintain our idea of the self and to practice our body into spaces that have been made open for us, right? So we're not just there. Our bodies are place-making practices. Our bodies are maps, if you will. So when I fall sick, I go to the doctor. When I want to vote, I go to the voting booth. When I want a sense of education and belonging, I go to school. These are largely territorial practices, and there are ways we reflect ourselves back to ourselves. These are how we navigate our senses of identity. This is how we say to ourselves, I am a PhD, which means I am worth my time and you should listen to me, right? I notice that I'm becoming literally black as I speak. So as the night falls here, I'm literally turning blacker than I was. Becoming lost is when something disturbs your map, Francesca. When something sprouts and disturbs the trajectory of continuity. For instance, a pandemic. Suddenly, you couldn't go to the doctor anymore. You couldn't go to school anymore. Something sprouted and disturbed the cartography, right? So becoming lost is both the alliance of humans and non-humans. When the road rises up, so to speak, and meets you in the middle. Now, the question is what happens there in that crack where the continuity is no longer possible? The invitation of modernity is to flatten things and get back to normal. The invitation of making sanctuary and getting lost is to go deeper into the failure and listen. Now, there are ways to do that, but I see you want to say something.
No, I was just thinking, because one thing that modernity taught us is to not take care of this. You know, we are so trained in not realizing that there is some lostness. You know, we work us to death and this kind of thing. And there is a lot of endurance without even noticing. So there must be a sort of a shift or someone, you know, something that even shows us. I mean, the pandemic now is clearly one moment of getting lost, but there is, as I've understood you, that's all over. You know, there is all the time. It's sort of here, and
I feel modernity is more about modernity, and its resilience and its permanence is more about us doing the same things over and over again. Not just us, but even the environments that support our claims to exclusivity. So we're doing it over and over again. For transformation to happen, it has to be beyond us. Something bursts in like a Messiah, you know, and suddenly we can't go forward anymore. There's a wall there, we can't go forward. Modernity is the attempt to break through that wall. So the Anthropocene has thrown up climate change. What are we trying to do as citizens of the city? We're trying to burst through it with climate justice and all those things. We do not allow for the idea that a virus might be alive or that climate change might be a god that is asking us to worship in a different way. We do not know how to see the world as alive in that way. So we want to burst through with new technologies, and then we paint this as justice. So my invitation then is to stray away from the circuit of continuity, those liminal, electrified places where we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We want to go a different way, take a flight of exile. And how do we do that? By listening, by cultivating different senses. And this can take different forms: political movements, small gatherings in our homes, you know, sharing food with each other. It's huitlacoche. You know huitlacoche? It's a fungus that the Mexican people eat as food, right? That is transformation. To many people, that's just a fungal entity, and we should pathologize it and heal our bodies. But to others, that's a possibility that's a dietary gastronomical possibility that we've not learned to lean into yet. So that's what I'm saying here. In the shortest way I can put it, that getting lost is when things are unable to continue in their usual paths and a new direction is called for. Then decoloniality is not about saving the day. It's not about becoming victorious. It's about what we do to listen to that entity that has arrived.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the questions, and please really put them in the chat if you have some thoughts and comments. But first, I would also like to thank you, Bayo. We have to close down.
Yes.
And thank you very much to stay with us also for so long and have these discussions with all of us. We will continue with our seminars and lectures, and I think it will be really going in a very interesting way, how we will unsettle the unsettled. And but maybe we can finish with this, what you also said, that the body's unsettled is actually invitation to meet ourselves also in a new ways, and we go further with that. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much.